did you see this where Joe Biden is now calling Vladimir Putin a war criminal? Let me show you. Here we go.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter, you saw what happened in Bucha. This warrants him. He is a war criminal. But we have to gather the information. We have to continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to continue the fight. And we have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial. This guy is brutal. And what's happening in Bucha is outrageous. And everyone's seen it. Up to Allah. No, I think it is a war crime.
What are you going to do about it, sir? Are you going to do more sanctions on Russia?
I'm seeking more sanctions, yes. I'll have time without sanctions.
So there he is calling him a war criminal and saying we got to get the evidence so we can prosecute this guy. But the venue where war criminals are tried is the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which the United States has steadfastly refused to join out of fear of having its own officials tried and held accountable there. That's why so many of them are on Twitter and in cable green rooms. That's the irony. George Bush would be prosecuted as a war criminal. Joe Biden supported full-throated the Iraq war, which was a war crime. And, of course, all the things that go along with it, torture and all that other stuff. He didn't prosecute any of the people who did and maintained a torture facility for his whole vice presidency on Guantanamo Bay. So the United States are the biggest records and war crimers going right now. That's why it's ironic. And so what they're talking about, Aaron, is they're talking about this. This is from the Defense of Ukraine. It has the blue check. And it says, news, Srebrenica, the Ukrainian city of Bucha, was in the hands of the animals, Russian animals, for several weeks. Local civilians were being executed arbitrarily, some with hands tied behind their backs, their bodies scattered in the streets of the city. So this is being reported as fact that Russia was shooting unarmed citizens with their hands tied behind their back and then left them in the streets. This is what they're reporting as fact. Now, this makes about as much sense as the Assad gassing his own people as he's winning the war. It doesn't make any sense that Assad would do that, and that's why Aaron Matei debunked those gas attack conspiracy theories that was spread by the CIA and the mainstream news media. Here it says Russia claims Bucha civilian massacre was faked as a provocation as outrage builds over Ukraine war atrocities. So this is from Moon of Alabama. They tweeted out, Russian troops on March 30th, the Russian troops leave Bucha. On March 31st, the mayor of Bucha announces the town was liberated and makes no mention of atrocities. Then, on April 1st and 2nd, Azov Nazis enter Bucha. And then on April 3rd, they publish all the Russian atrocities. So they're seeming to say that it was the Nazis that did that. Now, if you know anything about how this war started, it started with the United States helping overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine with the help of neo-Nazis that started firing on people in the Maidan Square. And we now know that's what happened. It wasn't the president of Ukraine firing on his own people. It was the far-right neo-Nazis doing that to provoke a coup. And so here, they seem to be implying that that's what the Azov Nazis were doing. They are doing a false flag, committing atrocities, and blaming it on Russia. And in fact, this is from the New York. It says, Ukraine's defense ministry posted a video early Sunday and accused Russian forces of executing civilians in a suburb of the capital where bodies in civilian clothes dotted the streets in the wake of the Russian withdrawal. In the footage, 3 bodies in civilian clothing are seen clustered on the side of a road in a suburb, Bucha. A white cloth binds the hands of one body behind its back, and a dried pool of blood spreads out from the head. Local civilians were being executed arbitrarily, some with hands tied behind their backs. The ministry wrote in a tweet accompanied the video. The statement added that the scenes were a new Srebrenica, a reference to a 1995 massacre during the Bosnian War. Russian officials did not immediately respond to the allegations. The New York Times was unable to independently verify the assertions by Ukraine Defense Ministry and other officials. So this looks like garbage again. And here's what Michael Tracy tweeted out, he says, MSNBC did zero original reporting to corroborate any aspect of these events. They just showing video and tweets provided by Ukraine government officials, but that hasn't stopped NBC's host Ali Velshi from declaring genocide and repeating his insane call for NATO intervention. And I just want to show you this. Our Ali Velshi actually tweeted this out. This remarkable New York Times investigation using satellite imagery disproves the Russian claim, amplified by U.S. conspiracy theorists, that somehow Ukrainians themselves killed or planted the dead bodies discovered in Bucha. So this is the New York Times did their own investigation. And the New York Times is confirming this to be true. The New York Times. Now, let's remember, Aaron, the last time the New York Times confirmed a war crime that the United States wanted them to confirm. I don't know if you remember what it was, but it was the chemical attack in Syria. And so what did the New York Times do? They created a pretend digital version of what happened. What they did was they imagined what it looked like, and then they got some graphics made. It said how we created a virtual crime scene to investigate Syria's chemical attack. And they got it 100% wrong. They got it 100% wrong. And here it is. How we created a virtual crime scene to investigate Syria. There it is. It was all bullshit. So could you, let me bring in Aaron. Well, let me show you one more thing before I have you comment on this. Here's Max Blumenthal's tweeting out a gray zone report that says new witness testimony about the Mariupol maternity hospital airstrike follows a pattern of Ukrainian deceptions. So they were saying that the Russians were bombing a hospital with a maternity ward in it, and that was a war crime, and it was getting people upset. Gray Zone did a little investigating, and it turns out that story's bogus, and it following a pattern just like this recent story. He reports of Russian massacre of scores of civilians in the town of Bucha also contains suspicious details suggesting a pattern of information manipulation aimed at triggering Western military intervention. And here's the bogus story of the Russia bombing the hospital with the maternity wards. And then here it is. Now that she's telling the truth that the hospital wasn't targeted by Russia and the Ukrainian military used the mothers as human shields, stealing their food, Western media has downgraded Mariana to just a blogger. So now they're going, Ukraine blogger video fuels false info on Mariupol bombing. So now she's gone from a hero to just a blogger. So let me bring in Aaron and go ahead and take it where you will.
So, yes, in terms of the allegations about what happened in Bucha, the Times has just come out. I haven't read the story yet, but apparently what they did is they looked at satellite footage that matches bodies in the streets of Bucha to dates well before the Russians left, which means that these people were killed while Russia was there. Which means that, look, if these images are accurate, then it's quite possible that the allegation is correct, that Russia committed war crimes. There's no, war crimes happen in war, and it's awful. But unfortunately, the way this is being treated is then this would be grounds to accuse Russia of genocide or to intervene militarily, as people like Ali Velshi want. It's ridiculous. You can go back and look at the U.S., look at the Haditha massacre inside Iraq. Awful massacres, war crimes committed by the U.S. And there's many more examples of that. Even inside Ukraine, and people forget about this, but what started this war, as you mentioned, back in 2014, one of the key incidents was dozens of Ukrainians who were against the coup being burned alive in the Odessa massacre in May of 2014. And that helped trigger this awful war for the last 8 years. No one cares about that atrocity because the victims are on the wrong side. They're on the side that we're against, so we're not supposed to care about them. So if war crimes happen here, they should be investigated and prosecuted. And if Russia is guilty, then they should face every consequence for that. What's interesting is a few things. First of all, Russia has accused Ukraine of making false allegations. So they called for a UN Security Council meeting today to address this. That proposal was shot down. The UK and the US were very much against it. If you believe Russia is guilty here, why would you not want to have a public meeting about it and present your evidence? The other thing that should be happening is those bodies should be immediately collected by independent investigators who are actually in Ukraine right now from the International Criminal Court, so you can determine when they were killed. That is something that forensic pathologists can do. By the way, an area of expertise that was deliberately shunned in the OPCW's Duma investigation because they did not want to find out when the victims there were actually killed. But that's something that could happen right now, and everybody should support, is getting forensic pathologists to the scene to determine when these bodies were killed, when these victims were killed, because that will help determine a very key piece of evidence. And there also is, yes, as you mentioned,
so,
if we are going to treat it,
Aaron,
yeah.
Does it make any military sense that Russia, which is in the process of completely rolling over Ukraine, like everyone knows, would do that?
No, but that doesn't mean that.
That doesn't mean it didn't happen, but that it doesn't make. But it doesn't make sense. Just like the gas attack from Assad in Syria didn't make any sense, right?
Right, but the difference is that a chemical attack would have to be ordered at the highest level inside Syria. An atrocity, a war crime, could be committed by forces.
But we do know the Azov Battalion are real Nazis, and they commit atrocities like that.
Absolutely, and people like the Azov Battalion burned people alive. And,
so it's more likely. Do you think it's more likely that the Azov Battalion did that, and as a false flag, or do you think it's more likely? Which do you think is more likely?
I'm not going to weigh any other way. What I think is allegations like this should be investigated, and a very key piece of information to find out is get forensic pathologists in there and determine when they were killed. That will clear up a very key piece of evidence. Now, we should say about the Times, their satellite images may be correct here. And if they're correct, then that's a very key piece of evidence that these bodies were there before Russia withdrew. But let's also remember, as you point out, the same Times visual investigation team did a bogus, quote unquote, investigation of Duma using fancy animation to make it look as if they had proved that gas cylinders were dropped from Syrian military helicopters. Well, what happened after their investigation came out, we got leaks from the OPCW showing an extensive investigation was done by OPCW experts on the ground in Duma who reached an opposite conclusion. One inspector actually concluded that the canisters there were manually placed. And to date, the New York Times has never responded or even acknowledged the OPCW leaks. So if the Times was actually confident in its investigation of Duma, it would make the case as to why these veteran OPCW inspectors who went to Duma were wrong. But they haven't done that for obvious reasons. Their video was junk science. It was done to promote a narrative. So everything they say, I think, should be taken with skepticism, but it doesn't mean they're wrong here.
So when you build up that kind of emotion, so this is called manufacturing consent for war. So that's what this. So when the corporate news is reporting the atrocities committed by Russia and then tells you nothing about how we got this war started, that it was provoked by NATO, that there's an easy solution to end this, and that the United States, NATO, and Zelensky in Ukraine are dragging this out. It could be over. They're not telling you any of that. What they're focusing on is propaganda that talks about war crimes, so you get emotionally involved and you'll want the United States to go to war and you'd be willing to pay $7 gas prices to put a hurt on Putin, but you're not. You're putting a hurt on working people in the United States while enriching the fossil fuel companies. You're doing nothing to Putin. Because right now, Putin is about to step on the petrodollar, which is going to screw the United States economy. And this is all being done by Joe Biden, the Democrats, and the fossil fuel companies. So this is what it leads to. Listen to this crazy pro-war propaganda. Now, let's remember what the corporate news is there to do. They're there to manufacture consent. And right now, today, they're manufacturing consent for war. And here's how they did it.
Hey, look, I know what this means. I know what I'm saying. I served for 25 years. I serve to protect the innocent. We are the leaders of the free world. So yes, and my wife still serves. I don't speak for her, but I'm ready to commit at this moment, unlike I was before this day, to put people in direct contact with Russia, to stop Russia. Call it peacekeeping, call it what you will. We have to do more than provide weapons. And by we, I mean the United States. Yes, we're going to do it as a coalition with lots of other people, but we are the example. So put boots on the ground, send weapons directly at Russia. This is a massacre. This is a special kind of evil. Hey, look. I know.
And does that scare you to hear that kind of strong propaganda on corporate news right now, Aaron?
it's open advocacy for World War III, but this is where we've been headed all along. This is what these people have been clamoring for. And again, they talk about being willing to deploy U.S. troops. These are people that are not going to be fighting. Although this guy has a wife, he says, that's in the military, so maybe he's okay with her being sent off to war to die for what? This theoretical idea of not letting Russia dictate who can join NATO, even if it's a country on their borders and where a country that Russia has deep ties to. It's insane. But it's not pundits on TV or news anchors who pay the price of these wars. It's foremost Ukrainians who are being used as cannon fodder. And there's all this talk about, we have to defend Ukraine's right to join NATO. Polls up until the war showed that Ukraine was still very, very divided over NATO membership. There's not an overwhelming majority of Ukrainians who want to be joining NATO for understandable reasons. They understand it would actually create risk for Ukraine because it raises confrontation with this nuclear armed behemoth on their border. So why would they want that? But those Ukrainians are ignored, and we're instead supposed to listen to only those who share the views of and agenda of neocons in Washington. It's nuts.
And so so the problem with people in corporate news who validate their own bias, and it's always pro-war, it's always whatever this CIA establishment is saying, is that if you're going to tweet this out and say, hey, the New York Times just confirmed this, you also have to give context. Like, let's remember the last time they confirmed something like that, it was 100% made up. So let's not rush to conclusions. Like, that would be a responsible way to report that instead of reporting it as fact. Let's remember that the first casualty in war is the truth. And let's quit. And so what this is this gets you worked up emotionally so you'll be for more war. And then Ali brings on that guy who says he's ready. He's out there defending freedom. And he's willing to go do it right now with Russia. And this is a massacre, and we got to do it. And that's called manufacturing consent for war. And that's what the mainstream news does. I have friends who think only Fox News does that, but that is done just as vehemently, even more so maybe, at CNN, MSNBC, and all the other networks. They're all manufacturing consent for war. They're all funded by Wall Street and the military-industrial complex, and they're all owned by the same handful of billionaires. Okay, so that you got to remind, and so this is irresponsible. Of course, that's what the corporate news does. They always take the pro-war line, and they dismiss anything, and they call people like Aaron and me who debunk their pro-war conspiracies. They call us conspiracy theorists. That when Aaron was debunking, when Aaron joined me in debunking the Syrian gas attacks.
It's true. I did join you. You were first.
I was out in front on that. You
deserve a lot of credit for that, JD. You really do.
When he joined me on that, we were both smeared roundly. Aaron, luckily, was given the Eye of Stone award for independent journalism on that. But are there war crimes happening? Yes, I probably, and they're happening on both sides. And let's remember, the biggest war crimer is the United States. Look, I don't think that's really debatable, that the biggest war crimer of the last 20 years has been the United States. Hands down. I don't even think it's close. Look what we did to Iraq. Look what we did to Syria. Look what we did to Libya. Look at Somalia. Look at Yemen. We're helping us right now. We're occupying a third of Syria right now illegally. That's a war crime. That's a war of aggression. That's an illegal act. Also, we're helping facilitate a real genocide in Yemen right now. Nobody talks about that. But we're all supposed to focus on Ukraine because it's a fossil fuel war, and that's what they want you to focus on. Ali Velshi's bosses want him to focus on Ukraine and not focusing on Yemen or Somalia or Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, anything else. They want him to focus on that. That is what he focuses on, and he doesn't give you any context when he reports. I'm not picking on Ali Velshi. I'm just showing that as a typical example of a corporate news host, and he's from Canada.
And look, listen, Jimmy, again, it's worth stressing. It's quite possible these specific war crimes allegations in Bucha are correct. But again, it's worth remembering that Ukrainian forces have also been credibly accused of committing war crimes. There's a video of Ukrainian soldiers asking, or Ukrainian forces asking for permission to shoot dead Russian captives, and that permission is given. So atrocities like this have happened on all sides. The answer for everyone is not to selectively choose certain atrocities or certain alleged atrocities and clamor for war based on that. The answer is to call for an end to the war by all sides. And the only reasonable solution on the table is for Ukraine to accept neutrality. We live in a real world where these are the only options. I personally wish Russia had not invaded. I think its grievances were legitimate. I wish it had handled them in a peaceful way, but they did. This is the situation we're in right now. And the answer to Russia's invasion is not to fuel it with more weapons and now these crazy calls for World War III. The answer is to accept the options on the table, which include Ukraine not joining NATO, which Zelensky, as we talked about, has admitted he was told won't happen anyway. So why continue to destroy a country for the sake of something that everyone involved knows will not actually happen in reality anyway?
Aaron Mate's been our guest. You can catch his work at the Gray Zone on Pushback and over at Substack. It's mate.substack.com. Thanks very much for being our guest, Aaron.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Okay, see you soon. Come see a live stand-up show or be in Orlando, Tampa, Cleveland, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, Omaha, Des Moines, everywhere. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for our live show tickets. Also, become a premium member and get access to all our extra stuff and help support the show. See you at a live show. Single tickets now available. Single tickets available.